I never thought a simple road trip could unravel into something that would haunt me every time I set foot behind the wheel. But that's exactly what happened one late summer evening, when I decided to take the long drive from Santa Fe to visit a college friend in Denver. I was 24, freshly out of a bad relationship, craving a little adventure and independence. The open road always felt like freedom to me, a space where I could crank up the music, let the wind pour through the open window, and forget the weight of my own thoughts. I had no idea that stretch of highway would turn into the most terrifying test of my life. The first half of the drive was almost peaceful. The desert stretched endlessly around me, red rock glowing in the last of the sun, and the air smelled faintly of dust and heat. I had stocked up on snacks, fueled the car, and even made a playlist that could last the entire trip. As dusk rolled in, the sky melted into soft streaks of purple and orange. The world felt wide and lonely, but in a way I'd always appreciated, at least until the loneliness took on another meaning. Around the time the sun dipped fully below the horizon, and the two-lane highway seemed swallowed by shadows, I noticed the car behind me. It was an old boxy sedan, dark in color, maybe navy blue or black, with headlights that looked dimmer than they should have been. At first I didn't think much of it. After all, cars come and go on long highways. But after 20 minutes passed, and that car was still glued to my rear bumper, at a steady, unsettling distance, the back of my neck began to prickle. I tapped the brakes lightly, the way you do to send a signal without fully slowing down, and the driver tapped theirs too, mimicking me. My chest tightened. I sped up, pushing 10 miles over the limit, and the sedan followed, its headlights keeping the same suffocating rhythm behind me. There was nothing around us, no other cars, no gas stations, no motels, just endless dark desert and the faint outline of mountains in the distance. Trying to calm myself, I told myself it was coincidence, that maybe they were headed to the same town further down. But when I passed a small turnout, a gravel shoulder with a faded sign pointing toward an abandoned rest stop, and pulled halfway onto it as if to let them pass, the car didn't overtake me. Instead, it slowed too, hanging back. That's when the fear in my gut turned sharp and undeniable. I pulled back onto the road, forcing myself not to panic, and tried calling my friend. No signal. My phone screen taunted me with the words "no service," the icon of the battery dipping lower than I would have liked. I tossed it onto the passenger seat with trembling hands, gripping the wheel tighter as the darkness seemed to press in from all sides. For the next 30 miles, it was a game of nerves. Every time I sped up, the sedan sped up. Every time I slowed, so did they. My chest ached from holding my breath. Then, just when I thought I might lose it completely, another pair of headlights appeared in the distance. Relief flooded me as a pickup truck approached from the opposite direction. For a second I felt like waving out the window, trying to flag them down, but by the time it passed, the road was empty again, except for me and the shadow that hunted me. I thought about pulling into the next exit, but when it finally came into view, my blood ran cold. The exit was deserted, a narrow road leading to a rundown gas station with its lights long dead. Worse, another car sat on the shoulder of that exit ramp, a different one, a pale van, its silhouette unmistakable against the faint moonlight. As I drew closer, my headlights revealed two figures standing outside it, one leaning casually against the hood, the other perched on the curb, smoking. Both men turned their heads toward me as I approached, their faces catching just enough light for me to see the way they didn't look surprised to see me at all. It hit me like a punch to the stomach. This wasn't random. The sedan behind me wasn't just another driver. They were working together. My hands went slick with sweat, and instinct took over. Instead of taking the exit, I slammed the accelerator and stayed on the main road, my tires squealing in protest. The men by the van straightened, one of them taking a step forward, and for a sickening second, I imagined what would have happened if I had slowed, if I had pulled into that exit, if I had been foolish enough to stop where they were waiting. The sedan behind me responded instantly, speeding up in kind, its engine growling louder now, more aggressive. It swerved slightly from side to side, like it was testing me, pushing me, trying to herd me toward the next trap. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall, my pulse hammering so violently I thought I might faint right there at the wheel. The road stretched endlessly ahead, no town lights in sight, no help, just me and two predators playing with their prey. The loneliness of the desert, something I'd always loved, now felt like a cruel stage designed for my destruction. I forced myself to think. If I lost control, if I panicked, I was done. So I watched the road carefully, scanning for anything that could give me an edge. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted a construction sign ahead, the kind that warned of a narrowed lane. Fresh cones lined the right shoulder, bright orange against the blackness. An idea came, reckless but maybe my only chance. As the cones forced the road tighter, I pretended to hesitate, slowing slightly as if I was uncertain. The sedan grew bolder, edging closer to my bumper, maybe thinking I was losing my nerve. At the last second, I veered hard left, skimming the yellow divider line, and then slammed the brakes just enough to throw them off. The sedan overcorrected, clipped one of the cones, and fishtailed violently. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I hit the gas and shot forward, the sound of rubber screeching against asphalt echoing behind me. My car rattled with the force of my speed, but I kept going, hands locked white-knuckled on the wheel. Minutes later, headlights appeared again in the distance, this time steady, growing brighter. A semi-truck thundered past going the other way, then another car, and soon the road wasn't as empty. My lungs expanded for the first time in over an hour as civilization finally appeared. Gas stations, diners, the neon glow of a motel sign. I pulled into the first open station I saw, parked beneath the fluorescent lights, and practically collapsed against the steering wheel, my body trembling uncontrollably. When I looked into the rearview mirror, the sedan was gone. I stayed at that gas station until dawn, locked in my car, sipping stale coffee from a vending machine, and trying not to cry in front of strangers. I kept telling myself I was safe, but even surrounded by people and lights, the memory of those two men on the ramp burned into me. Their faces, the way they waited, the way the sedan pushed me toward them, it all carved into my brain like a scar I'll never be rid of. The police later told me there had been reports of similar incidents on remote highways, sometimes robberies, sometimes worse, but most drivers never made it far enough to report back. Hearing that didn't make me feel better, it only made me shiver harder, realizing just how close I had been to becoming another name whispered in warning. To this day, whenever I drive alone and the road stretches too long, too empty, I can feel it creeping back, the heat of headlights on my back, the silence of the desert, the sense of being watched by men who had already decided my fate. And sometimes, when a car follows me for too many miles, I can almost swear it's that same sedan just waiting for me to slip, waiting to finish what it started on the longest mile of my life. I've always been the kind of person who takes back roads when traveling. Highways bore me, all smooth lanes and billboards screaming the same fast food promises. Back roads have history in their cracks, stories whispered through rusting barns and forgotten gas stations, and I like to imagine the lives that passed through before me. But one evening, driving through the fading light of a rural town I couldn't even find on the map, I regretted my curiosity. My gas tank was low, the warning light glowing with quiet menace, and I hadn't seen a station in miles. The houses had thinned, trees crowding the road, until at last I spotted a crooked wooden sign nailed to a tree. The paint had almost peeled off, but I could still make out the words, General Supplies. An arrow pointed down a dirt lane. Desperation overrode judgment. I turned. The road was rough, my tires crunching over gravel. At the end stood a squat building, wood-weathered gray, a hand-painted sign above the door. The word supplies was uneven, as though painted by a shaky hand. I parked and stepped out, the silence of the place pressing against my ears. No cars, no sound of life, just that building, waiting. Inside smelled of dust and something sour, like old metal left out in the rain. A single bulb swayed from the ceiling, its dim yellow glow casting uneven shadows. The shelves were nearly bare, a few cans of food, some rope, and tools that looked decades old. Behind the counter stood a man. He was thin, so thin I thought his shirt was draped over bones alone. His skin had the sallow tone of candle wax. His hair slicked flat against his head. His eyes, pale gray, studied me as though I had just walked into his home uninvited. His lips parted into something that wasn't quite a smile. Need something? His voice was raspy, like dry leaves scraping across the ground. I cleared my throat. Gas. Do you sell gas around here? He shook his head slowly, as though amused by the question. No gas, but I've got other things. things you won't find at any station. There was something in his tone that sent a prickling chill up my spine. I should have left then, but my curiosity, always the thing that got me into trouble, held me there. Like what? The man bent down behind the counter. I heard the scrape of wood, the metallic clink of a latch, and then he stood again, holding a small wooden box. It looked ancient, the wood dark with age, its edges scarred. He placed it on the counter and slid it toward me with long bony fingers. I hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of small glass vials, each no bigger than my thumb, sealed with cork, and inside each vial was a fingernail. Some were clean and pale, others yellowed with age, and a few blackened as if charred. My stomach twisted. "What is this?" I asked, my voice low. The man's gray eyes glinted. "Nails. Not just any nails. Nails of the dead." I let out a short, uneasy laugh. "You're joking." He shook his head slowly, savoring the denial he knew was coming. "People throw bones in the ground, bury them deep, flesh rots away. But nails, they cling. They hold the memory of who they belong to. A man's last pain, a woman's last scream, a child's last breath, all trapped in these. I collect them, I sell them, to those who know their worth." The room felt colder. I swallowed hard, unable to tear my eyes from the box. Who would buy something like this? He leaned closer, his breath stale and sour, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Some carry them for protection, others, for power, and some just like to hear the dead when they dream." I snapped the lid shut, and shoved the box back toward him, trying to disguise my shaking hands. "That's sick." His lips pulled back into that knot smile again. "Sick, or true. Don't dismiss what you don't understand. Death clings, whether you want it or not. Sometimes, the dead follow you home, with or without a nail." I turned to leave, but he called out, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You'll be back." I didn't answer, just pushed through the door and hurried to my car, heart pounding. I started the engine, relieved when it roared to life, and sped back to the main road, the general store shrinking in my rearview mirror until it disappeared. I didn't look back. By the time I reached the next real town, night had fully fallen. I found a station, filled my tank, and tried to laugh off the encounter as some deranged local's twisted hobby. But when I pulled into the motel later, my body heavy with exhaustion, I felt that man's eyes still on me. Sleep didn't come easy. When it did, it was fractured, broken by strange dreams. In one, I stood in a field of graves, the soil fresh, nails sprouting from the earth like crooked weeds. In another, I heard scratching at my motel door, long and desperate, as though someone were trying to claw their way in. I woke gasping, heart slamming, only to find the night silent again. In the morning, I tried to shake it off as nerves, stress, a bad encounter, and nothing more. I packed my bag, ready to leave the town behind. But when I opened the trunk to load my suitcase, my breath caught. There, sitting neatly on top of my things, was a small glass vial, a fingernail curled inside, yellow and cracked, catching the morning light. I didn't touch it. I slammed the trunk shut so hard the sound echoed across the lot. For a long moment I stood frozen, the morning air cold against my skin, realizing one impossible thing. I hadn't brought that box with me. I hadn't touched those vials, and yet one was here, waiting. I left the motel without checking out, my bag still in the trunk. The road stretched ahead, but I no longer saw adventure in its cracks. I saw only shadows, and I knew, with a dread that sank into my bones, that the man had been right. The dead cling, whether you want them or not. When my friends bailed on our long-planned camping trip, I told myself I was fine going alone. I had already booked the campsite weeks in advance, bought a brand new tent, and stocked my cooler with enough food to last the weekend. It wasn't unusual for me to hike solo anyway. I had done plenty of day trips into the mountains near my hometown, and there was something liberating about not having to match someone else's pace or worry about their schedule. Still, something in the back of my mind whispered that an overnight alone in the woods was different. I ignored that voice, convincing myself it would be a chance to disconnect, read by the fire, and wake up to the quiet serenity of nature. The campsite I chose wasn't remote in the technical sense, just a few miles off the main forest road. but it felt cut off from the world the moment I parked and turned off the engine. The air was crisp with pine, and the silence was thick except for the rustle of leaves shifting under the late afternoon breeze. I set up my tent with the kind of confidence that came from practice, unrolled my sleeping bag inside, and stacked kindling near the fire pit. The sun dropped behind the mountains faster than I expected, and by the time the first stars pricked the sky, the woods were already swallowing the light. That's when I realized just how different this was from hiking. There was no easy retreat back to a car buzzing with music, no chatter of friends to chase away the shadows, just me, the towering dark of the trees, and the crackle of firewood. At first I enjoyed it. I roasted a couple marshmallows, scribbled a few lines in my journal, and leaned back in my camp chair to watch the constellations appear. My phone had no signal, and though that should have unnerved me, I felt a small thrill in knowing I was truly cut off. Around 10 o'clock I decided to call it a night. I doused the fire carefully, zipped up my tent, and curled into my sleeping bag, the thin nylon walls of my shelter sighing with every gust of wind. I drifted in and out of sleep, the forest alive with creaks and distant sounds I couldn't name. Sometime past midnight, I woke to the distinct crunch of footsteps outside my tent. At first I froze, my mind scrambling for explanations, an elk maybe, or a raccoon rummaging near the extinguished fire pit. I held my breath, straining to listen. The sound came again, slow and deliberate, moving closer. I reminded myself of the food I had stored in the cooler just outside. Maybe some animal had smelled it. Still, there was a heaviness to those steps that made my heart pound. Animals didn't usually pause between steps the way people did. I waited, body rigid, until the sound faded. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me back under, though my dreams were restless and sharp with fear. The next morning I tried to laugh it off. I told myself the woods could play tricks on a half-asleep brain, that fear amplified every sound. But when I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The cooler, which I had bunged shut and left by the picnic table, was untouched. No scratch marks, no lid pried open. Whatever had walked by my tent hadn't been looking for food. It had just been walking. I packed a small bag and set off on a trail nearby, trying to shake off the unease. Hiking usually cleared my head, and for a while it worked. The trail wound through dense forest, sunlight breaking through in fractured beams, and I lost myself in the rhythm of my boots crunching dirt. But halfway through I noticed something strange. A footprint. Not a boot print like mine, but the worn tread of a different shoe, pressed into the mud along the edge of the path. At first I thought nothing of it. Plenty of people use the trails. But as I kept walking, I saw more, fresher ones, weaving in and out of mine as if someone had been shadowing my steps. I didn't see anyone ahead or behind me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. By the time I returned to camp in the late afternoon, nerves prickled across my skin. I told myself I was being paranoid, and I tried to settle back into the routine of building a fire, cooking and reading. As night fell again, the forest closed in tighter, and the silence pressed heavier. I was almost grateful for the fire, the way it crackled and popped like company. I tried to convince myself that the footsteps from the night before had been a dream. Around 11, as I sat staring into the flames, I heard it again, movement just beyond the glow of my firelight. It was faint, like someone shifting their weight, careful not to snap a twig. My eyes darted into the darkness, scanning for the glint of an animal's eyes, but there was nothing. I sat frozen, the hairs on my arms standing tall, my pulse racing in my throat. Then, just as suddenly, the noise stopped. I forced myself to breathe, doused the fire to embers, and retreated into the tent, zipping the flap tight. I lay awake for hours, every creak of the trees amplified, until exhaustion dragged me into a fitful sleep. I woke with the dawn, my body stiff from tension. When I stepped outside, I saw fresh prints in the dirt, unmistakably human, circling my campsite. They weren't mine. The size, the depth, the direction, they told a story I didn't want to read. Someone had been walking around my tent while I slept, watching, waiting. Panic gripped me. I didn't even bother cooking breakfast. I stuffed everything into my pack haphazardly, broke down the tent with trembling hands, and loaded the car as fast as I could. I told myself I would drive straight home, leave the forest behind me, and forget the trip ever happened. But as I pulled out onto the narrow dirt road, winding deeper into the woods before it connected to the main highway, I saw it, a truck, parked just off the tree line, facing the road. Its windows were tinted, its paint scratched and dull, and though I couldn't see the driver, I felt the unmistakable weight of eyes following me as I passed. My hands clenched the wheel. I pressed the accelerator harder, dust kicking up behind me, but the unease thickened when I checked the rearview mirror. The truck was no longer parked where I had seen it. It was moving, following me. My chest tightened, and every nerve screamed to drive faster, but the road was narrow, winding, with steep drop-offs on either side. I tried to keep calm, telling myself it might be coincidence, that maybe they were just leaving camp too, but every curve I took, every turn they matched, closer, closer. When I finally reached the junction to the highway, I turned left without signaling, hoping to throw them off. The truck turned too. My mouth went dry. I pushed harder on the gas, the trees blurring past, the road unspooling like a nightmare. They stayed behind me, never too far, never passing, just lingering like a shadow I couldn't shake. I drove for miles, my mind spinning with what to do. There were no towns nearby, no gas stations or convenience stores, just endless road and endless forest. My phone still had no service, and with every passing minute, the realization settled deeper that I was utterly alone. That was when the truck suddenly accelerated, pulling closer until I could make out its grille in my rearview mirror, looming larger, threatening to tap my bumper. My heart pounded, sweat dripping down my neck, hands slippery on the steering wheel. Then, just as quickly, it slowed again, dropping back several car lengths. They weren't trying to run me off the road, they were toying with me, letting me know they could, if they wanted to. I felt a scream clawing at my throat, but I kept it inside, my focus locked on keeping the car steady. Minutes stretched like hours, the truck's presence a constant weight pressing on my spine. Finally, mercifully, I saw the green sign for a ranger station a few miles ahead. Without thinking twice, I swerved off the highway toward it. The truck lingered for a beat, then, just before the turn, it slowed to a crawl. I watched in the mirror as it stopped on the shoulder, idling, before slowly reversing back into the forest road I had come from. By the time I rolled into the ranger station's gravel lot, my body was shaking so hard I could barely shift into park. I stumbled inside, blurting out the story to the ranger on duty, my words tumbling over each other. He listened, brows furrowed, but when he walked me back outside to check, the road was empty. No truck, no tire marks, nothing. For the rest of that day, I stayed in town too terrified to drive the highway back alone. Even when I finally did, escorted by a friend I begged to meet me, I couldn't shake the image of those footprints circling my tent, the truck idling just out of sight, the deliberate way they had followed me without ever making a move. It was a game, and I had been the prey. That was 3 years ago. I haven't camped alone since. I still hike, still love the woods, but when the sun starts to dip, I make sure I'm heading home, not zipping up a tent, because sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I can hear those slow footsteps circling, circling, and I realize the scariest part wasn't that they followed me, it was that I never found out what they were waiting for.